These pictures were filmed last year. They show Jews attacking Jews, and it's happening at Judaism's holiest site. This group of men and boys believes that women should not be allowed to lead prayers here or wear the same religious garments that men do. But listen to what they're shouting. There's misogyny here and intolerance, but this group also doesn't believe that these women are Jews. Israel is in charge here. Shouldn't it be doing more? The Western Wall is the holiest site in Judaism today, holy because it was one of the retaining walls of the Second Jewish Temple. That temple was destroyed nearly 2,000 years ago, so the wall is pretty much the closest you can get to its site without climbing up to the plaza on top. But for centuries that has been the location of Muslim holy sites. So the Western Wall and its accompanying plaza is the place to go to pray if you're Jewish or if you just happen to be in the area. The plaza is gender segregated. Men and women are not allowed to pray alongside each other there, which is what you'd expect if you follow Orthodox traditions of Judaism. That's the flavour of Judaism practiced by the Israeli state and by the authorities who operate the Western Wall. But it can be quite jarring if you come from a progressive denomination, and millions of Jews do. These are men and women who pray alongside each other in their own synagogues or attend services that are led by women, but they aren't allowed to do that at the Western Wall. It's a complaint voiced by diaspora Jews everywhere, but particularly in the United States, where most congregations are progressive. And it's a debate that's been raging ever since the late 1960s, when Israel took control of this part of Jerusalem during the Six-Day War. So what's the solution? A decade ago, this man said he had the answer.
So the Kotel, the Western Wall, has been an area of conflict for 25 years because it is controlled by the Orthodox. And what happens to to other streams, reforms, conservatives, they couldn't come and pray the way they want to pray. 25 years of fighting. 2.5 months ago, I instructed the CEO of my ministry quietly, go build a third plaza. You have a men's plaza, a women's plaza. Build a third one 50 meters to the right. And it's up.
But it was very small. And unlike the main plaza, it wasn't wheelchair accessible. And tucked away as it is, away from the main plaza, it doesn't get as much attention from maintenance teams, which is how things like this happened.
לא הרגשתי כלום עד שהאבן נחתה ממש ליד הרגליים שלי, והיה חור גדול כמו שרואים ברצפה, זה מין, איך קוראים לזה, דק, וגם אפילו נשברו קרשים של המדרגות שמובילים לדק הזה.
Naftali Bennett's small platform was always meant to be interim, a stopgap. It was clear that a wider compromise was urgently needed.
I think the situation had reached an impasse where the dynamic that's existed for the past few decades of conflict feels so at odds with what this temple represents Jewishly. And it felt like it was the time to try and find a way for the very strong feelings around the issue to be held in a way that it didn't continue to have such a toxic impact.
And the word toxic isn't an exaggeration. These were the scenes a year ago when a group called the Women of the Wall met in the Western Wall Plaza for their monthly prayer meeting. They were assaulted, they were jeered, and their prayer books were seized and torn up. And it's happened more recently too.
We have the feeling that violence towards us is becoming more and more dangerous. 6 months ago, one of the protests against a 16-year-old girl pinched me so severely that I had a bruise on my arm for 2 weeks. It's disproportionately big to what you could imagine a pinch could be. They are pushing us and they are yelling at us and they are more confident that they'll do whatever they want to do and nothing will happen to them.
The Women of the Wall movement says the authorities, the police and the body that manages the Western Wall Plaza don't take their complaints seriously and they don't try to protect them. That pinching incident was not investigated. And despite a wealth of video evidence and 12 months having elapsed, no one has been charged for tearing up prayer books. So if the underlying problem is that there is no suitable space for egalitarian prayer at the Western Wall, there is a solution. In 2016, the Israeli cabinet approved plans to create a third prayer space.
Nothing would change with the current segregated gender sections. So what's important to state here is that nobody was losing their own religious freedom. It was about making sure that everyone's religious freedom was respected. So the plaza, as you might have visited it before if you've been to the primary plaza, would remain unchanged. What would change is that to the current right of the plaza is an area, the southern section of that wall, which would be turned into a larger egalitarian plaza.
But that same year, the plans were put on ice because of objections within Benjamin Netanyahu's government, specifically from the strictly Orthodox parties, and they haven't been revived, even since Israel's change in government, which saw the man who created the interim prayer space become the prime minister. Some members of his government think now is the time to put the plan back into motion.
The Kotel should be open for and available for everyone. That's the basic attitude of the present government. I disagree with the prime minister. I have to tell you, very honestly. I disagree with him that he hasn't brought it to an end so far.
But other ministers disagree. They say the plans will not be enacted, and there's a loud effort to keep the Western Wall as it is.
Today, in Yerushalayim, the Kotel as we know it is under attack. To reflect anti-religious voices, the Israeli government wants...
This video says the holy site is under attack, and that Israel wants to give control of the wall to progressive movements. That is not true. The campaign behind the video claims 150,000 diaspora Jews have signed a petition against the Western Wall compromise.
No, I don't think it's an exaggeration. There's a prevalent tradition at the Kotel, which reflects how most Israelis and most Jews in the diaspora see the Kotel as a site of prayer, which is based on our long tradition of Judaism. And by changing the Kotel, by changing its architecture, and by changing how things are done there, there's definitely a message that undermines the existing tradition. So yes, we do feel that there's a threat.
Earlier this year, Naftali Bennett himself announced the plans he helped to write are still on hold. But in the meantime, progressive movements like the Women of the Wall come under repeated attack. And not just from disorganized, strictly Orthodox groups. This was how security officials at the Western Wall tried to take prayer materials away from Tammy Gottlieb as she tried to enter the plaza. This happened just 2 months ago.
I don't think anybody wants to justify any kind of violence, and violence is really off the books in any kind of relationship, in any kind of family, and certainly in the Jewish family.
I think the fact that we are dealing with these issues more is actually a good thing.
Well, it's easy to show these pictures and to focus on them. It's a very small segment of usually rowdy teens that get involved in this kind of violence. That's obviously not a justification and it should not be there.
The violence against us is making people notice the issue. It's very bad, and we hope that we don't endure any more violence, but people are looking at this and saying this is wrong and this shouldn't be the face of Israel and of Judaism and of the Kotel, and let's change something about it.
So the question is, what do we put a focus on? And I think it will be much more healthy for the debate and for the discussion to put a focus on the greater group of people, the tens of thousands of people who come to pray at the Kotel and want to keep it as traditional. And there's a very small group of about 100 women or women of the wall who create a monthly provocation.
The Western Wall is the outer retaining wall of the temple compound. The temple that was destroyed, say the rabbis, because of baseless hatred amongst the Jews. I think it's really notable that some of the most violent expressions of baseless hatred between Jews in the world happen at the Kotel. And if we want to see the restoration of a peaceful place in that area, then the agreement is essential.